part of the problem with thinking about Tammuz as Cancer, you know, Tammuz as a masculine divinity is not so lunar associated, is he? But this is part of the thing. The disrupting of Tammuz, that is his death, and is also, the yahrzeit of the whole complex. From which the blessing flows. Let's say the whole complex of the moons within the season reach their point. Also, in parallel to being the 4 on top of 3, the negation of the negation, as they say in Hegeli's. The legendary resolution on the resolution is itself a criticism, because the real is a criticism of the perfect. And this is the theology of descent, right? Descent and descent. The moon emerges in the narrative from and amidst its own criticism. And the lunar, in reflecting the solar, is reflecting with a criticism. Legendarily, the criticism of the moon is what led it to become smaller. And in the darkness from its making itself smaller is a lot of all the everything that just was able to happen in the world, right? In as much as the moon holds herself back, right? As much as Artemis does really avenge, great in the darkness, But as much as just doesn't get to happen is tragic. And that's, I think, the fundamental Tammuz narrative, right? Adonis is just defeated, and it's a shame because he's beautiful, But it's important because he's beautiful that the shame happen. In the same way that in the Tammuz narrative, the king is dragged down to hell because he doesn't care enough about the feelings of his beloved and how much she's in hell. And it does become let's say, compared to the Persephone thing, right? Persephone is tricked into hell and then traded for back. There is still a sort of relationship to seasonality and commerce. That is the sort of Gemini narrative. But this gives way in the same way that the 4-letter name of God has, let's say, the 3rd letter is the last unique letter, because the 4th letter is still the 2nd letter. And this is part of the secret, I think, of the relationship between the moon and Venus. It's really troubling in Western conception, ostensibly, how much 2 of the 5 main planets, only 2 are female gendered, right? Isn't that always a little embarrassing? They couldn't get at least 3, 3.5. And traditionally, you could have a half a lot of different ways, with Mercury, with all the different Mercury trickster aspects, or Saturn, whatever. Saturn as like the, say, original undivided thing, the Salam Adam B'Shlemato, rather than the very gendered sort of like judgment thing, hungry judgment, that I would associate with the Tammuz complex more than any other star divinity. And the moon is like Saturn in terms of its distance from the heat of the sun and thus its coldness, but the moon is so much more defined, I repeat, in all of our ciphers by its wetness, by its dampness. And this is part of why the crab imagery tends to be in aquatic context. Like, where else do you see crabs? But let's say even in the archaic Babylonian ones, the crab is still a turtle. Still a kind of magnificent Skywinder on the beaches. I guess out in the desert it gets to be a pretty dry kind of turtle, you know. But the pivot, and I dare say the threat and tragedy, has to do with the heat in relationship to. Because part of the problem of conceiving of the sort of zodiac for me in relationship to its mythologies, which are really all I'm interested in, you know, not trying to do any scrying or foretelling, you know, I just want to get a sense of meaning, the depth of meaning in the fundamental cycles that are really major patterns in a certain context and really fountains for priorities in their way, identified with and deeply defined in the human way with the extremes of the seasons, of heat and cold, wet and dry. You know what? Part of the problem in mythologies and their association with the zodiac is how regional the narratives are. And this is one of the reasons conventional Egyptian religion really didn't go super far outside of the empire. You know, if you're in Egypt or visiting Egypt with some regularity, it makes a lot of sense to have a very sort of deeply connected relationship to the very specific entire priestly narrative. But it was so much about localism and not so much quite in relationship to a wider, larger human thing, except in the sort of competitive way, you know. They have a narrative of the moon sort of ascending to become um, the queen of heaven, but through a kind of trick game, which is related. Let's say even in the Persephone narrative, it's a trick game that gets her down there, and in the sort of Isis Ra narrative, you know, she poisons the god so she can heal him, and that makes her like the queen of heaven. And in the traditional Jewish narrative, you know, the moon's concern, the moon's hurt, not even, is it hurt? It wasn't hurt in the first place, except to the degree that the clarity itself, before incarnation and definition, the clarity itself hurts in that way that the criticism of a loved one hurts, you know. And to this end, I want to learn a quick piece in B'nai Yissaschar. Oh, 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 because it's a sort of rough time. Oh, Zeruf Vayashlei B'chodesh Tammuz Hu Hey Vav Hey Yotem Pasuk Kol Zenu Shoveli Kisom V'Devot Zeru Devaya Shal Chodesh B'nachem Avhu Hey Vav Yud Hey Nirmez B'Torah Nei Adonai B'Miknecha. The combination of the letters for this moon are the tetragrammaton backwards. You know, it's the same 4 letters, 12 different ways, are each of the moons, you know. And the one in the normal order is the one for the first month, you know, Aries, Nisan. But the one for the 4th month is already the whole thing just backwards. Hey Vav, Hey Yud. Learned out from the line in the book of Esther where Haman complains. Or he doesn't even really complain, you know. V'kol ze enenu shoveli. And all of this doesn't matter to me. All he starts is listing his great accomplishments. He's listing all of his great fortune. V'kol ze enenu shoveli. But all this, you know. V'kol and everything that I am, Asher Ani, everything that I am, because when I see, Mordechai, HaYehudi, Ro'eh Mordechai, HaYehudi, Yosef B'Shar Melech, Yosef B'Shar Melech. It doesn't matter, any of this. But the order for Leo, and the Bnei Yissaschar does a strange thing where he only wants to talk about Tammuz, only wants to talk about Cancer in the context of Leo, of Av. This is very traditional. But he's going to try to justify it, which is a little more rare. Mostly they don't try to justify it. And the letter order for Av, for Leo, is He Vav Yud He. He Vav Yud He. And here, instead of doing the thing he always does, where he associates a line in the Bible, in the Torah, where the four-letter name are in this particular order, and finds it in the middle of words and between stuff. I'm sure those are all traditions he just received. Here, he doesn't even do that. Instead, quoting a spot in the Bible where they just use the word Havaya, He Vav Yud He. Hinei Adonai Havaya b'miknecha. Here's the hand of the Lord your God, existence, being in your flocks. It's Exodus chapter 9:3. And through this, and some other contexts, different contexts, like the hand of God, the good hand on us, and the good Lord has, please help us, because it's a little nuanced. The order of the four-letter name for Cancer, for Tammuz, is the opposite order of the four-letter name. It's just the other way around, completely in reverse. Limafreya, ripped and turned like in that pharaonic way, completely legamre v'humore eladin, and this alludes to judgment. Judgment. Etzeruv ze Hashem anidhaweh hadin al Haman Rasha be'amro. And so, this combination of name, this hidden secret four-letter name in reverso, which is judgment and implies judgment and draws judgment, is what drew the judgment onto Haman, right? You ever see someone in prison complain about something that other people didn't think was justified complaining about, just would have bothered them for a reason? You guys ever see that? It's not a great trigger, Haman describes these wonderful things happening in his life, and just, I don't even care. As soon as he says, I don't even care, judgment. In this order, special ways, special words, special code words that are the opposite of acknowledgement, Yehuda, acknowledgement and appreciation. And so the power of judgment is big right now. It's huge. People are mad judgmental right now. Can't help it. Can't help but notice. You know why? Because it's hot and we have to deal with so much. So we can't help but notice the judgments. They just come up. They're just in a cycle of recognizing, acknowledging, and even happening, even being prioritized. And even before, 17th of Tammuz is a whole intense fast day leading to a whole intense fast day period. But even before that, which are the days that the spies went out. Do you guys know the story of the spies? Exodus, Moses and the Israelites in the desert. They can see it. Palestine, ancient Palestine, Jews, like, not even, who knows which part they want to see, Jericho. At the beginning of this moon, or I should say the end of Sivan, is when the spies they sent to go check out the land went to go look and check out the land, Spying is about checking, man. It's about checking. And so there's not necessarily so much mercy overcoming judgment right now. You really have to take care of all those things. It's getting hot, it's getting dry, it's getting vulnerable. Everything is super important right now. And alhamdulillah for the good things that we can prioritize that get to be important, gatherings, occasions. But whatever it is suddenly has to happen because it's like, but Av, like Leo, the first half of it is backwards, Avav, but then the second half of it is right side around again, Yud Hey, yeah, like the right way, yeah. Yeah. Morel 2, Yamim. So, yeah, everyone knows. It's the 15th, because Hey is 5 and Yud is 10. And so it implies the 15 days of the moon, the first 15, because the 15th of Leo is a holiday, again, an upbeat one, a festive, sort of carnival, sort of seems and feels too early to describe the specialness of the 15th of Av. And from the middle of Leo and so on, there's an awakening of mercy. Mercy comes back, let's say, deep in the turn of the heat. Mercy does come back around. In the middle of Leo, second half of Leo, which awakens repentance above, which is understanding. Understanding is what repentance above is, the upper hay. Nachol agid, you could say. And here's where he says it. Thank you for being so patient, everyone. בספר יצירה ימלך עוד חטא בריאה כשהלו כתר צבן זה וזה וצרהן סרטן בעולם ותמוז בשנה ויד ימין בנפש זכר ונקבה. So, in that originalist book of Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah describes the beginning of time, beginning of seasons, beginning of numbers and letters. And he crowned with the letter, the 8th letter, Het, in sight, in seeing, Bere'iyah. The Kashar Loketer, and bounded up a crown, at Sarfan, and fused it, Zeba Ze, this in that, Betzar, each one in the chain of the 12, Betzar Behem, and created in them, Sartan Ba'olam, created in them cancer in the cosmos, Tammuz B'shana, and, the time, Tammuz, the month, the moon, the month in time, Yad yamin benefesh zachar nekeva. And the right hand in the soul, masculine and feminine. Which is one of the nice progressive things in the Sacred Tzira, Also the 7, they're all multi-gendered. 7 on 7 facing 7, Definitely value judgment in relationship to them. It's the definition of value judgments, Rich and poor. Smart and stupid. אחר כך המליך אותת בשמיעה, וקשר לו כתר צרפן זה וזר עצר בהם. אריה בעולם, ואבא שנה בחוליה שמאלית בנפש זכר ונקבה. And then, Allah, in His infinite capacity, in the creation of the original patterns of time and space, in the fundamenting of the 12, after the 3 and the 7 have already, implied each other into being, and the 12 are being streamed. Let's say Aries is Hay, is the first Hay, and Taurus is Vav, right? And Sivan, Gemini, is Zion, right? Zion. We talked about that. And Cancer and Tammuz are Chet. Now, even me saying the name Chet implies the next letter, T, Et. The Chet is crowned in seeing, and that is understood to be the tikkun of Tammuz. And I've heard it read as noticing. Tammuz doesn't notice his partner's needs. It's really important to notice your partner's needs. And your partner is writ quite large, It's important to notice the needs of those closest to you, because they're yours. And that's part of the revelation of Gemini, but part of the negation, part of the inversion of that is noticing, is seeing. And judgment starts with seeing, Spies be seeing, spies be judging. But Leo, conceptually, is Tet. Tet is exactly what it sounds like. It's so strange that there's a Tet in addition to a Tav at the end of the alphabet. Because why does there need to be a Tav if the Tet does enough of it? But it's a very different concept, and it's a very different application. And the lion, that is Leo, and the Tet are crowned with hearing, the original and from then on inherent and infinite concept of hearing, the work of hearing, seeing and hearing. על כן הנך רואה אותיות ח' ט' המה השולטים בבית החדשים האלו. So you'll notice chet and tet ruling over these moons. Right? Why does the first moon start with Hay? The first 4 letters are already manifested in the 3, where the Aleph is really one of the major 3. Possibly the first. And if it's the 3rd, it's still even more so the first. Fine. The Aleph, the Mem, and the Shin, pre-established, inherent in the beginning of all the things. And notice how much the Mem and the Shin are very much associated with just heat and cold, right? Water and fire, which through each other become the seasons. and so on. So these two letters, chet and tet, make the word chet. And he's connecting this to the meanest thing he can connect it to. Sin. A sin that Jerusalem sinned. Like it says in the Lamentations that they read on the 9th of Leo. Oh, hinachot, oh. Ayde v'balaturim parshat vayachir kraya kol b'na v'ikesh legalot lahem et haketz v'nista mimenu amar shama chas v'shalom yesh bachem chet amru tadakdek b'shmotanu lo timatzeh b'hem otiyot chet. So Jacob, on his deathbed, famously, at the end of the book of Genesis, at the very end of the book of Genesis, Jacob is on his deathbed, and he wants to tell his kids everything. Traditionally, he saw the beginning and the end, especially the end. Everyone's seen the beginning, All the prophets have to gaze upon the beginning, and the whole tradition is about just getting back to the beginning a little bit, just to start from scratch, but to see the end. That was a big deal. The end. Right? What is prophecy? And what's like big prophecy? What's a real, resolution that you could know? Don't worry. A resolution is still coming. Jacob had this revelation. It's really part of the spirituality that's associated with him in Beit El, right? Seeing to the end of one extreme and beginning of another. But as much as he wanted to on his deathbed tell his kids what he knew and saw about what was coming, could not. The story goes. It was taken from him. Couldn't say it. Couldn't even remember it. The tradition is to say it's not because of anything anyone did wrong that he couldn't see it. Because there's definitely a pietistic tradition to be like, oh, what did those terrible kids do that he deserved to, or he did that he deserved to? And they say you should know. The taking away of this from Jacob, from Yaakov, it's not because of anything he did, and not because of anything anyone did. There is no moral of failure to be drawn from Yaakov's limitations, in this context at least. Because if you look at his whole thing that he says, his whole blessing, and his whole ramble to the kids, including the ones he doesn't really bless, there's no chet and no tet in any of it. He doesn't let chet or tet come into. So if you look it up, there's no letter chet or tet in any of that whole section. Some, historiographers just argue maybe those letters didn't quite exist yet when they wrote that part. Chas v'shalom yesh behem chet, amru dakdek b'shmotanu lo timatzeh behem otiyot chet tet. And the names of the kids, ha 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 ha. It's from the Baal Turim. Harei lecha otiyot gormiz, g'madam v'dai mechirach shilach zek, azman makom is nefesh v'amim v'sayim v'chol inyan. Whatever. Throws in a little caveat. These letters come together, and they don't always, everything's exceptional, nothing works all the time, all the ways, please just understand that in context, and understand. If See, the thing about chet is that it happens. Comes together because it means sin, but it means like mistake sin, and those things just happen, but they build up when they happen. However much they happen, they build up, and however much they build up, they happen. And it was supposed to would have been that in the days of Ezra, in the initial return from Babylon to Jerusalem, it was supposed to be miracles, like miracles. like the ones that happened to Joshua, with like just things exploding open and just being unbelievably successful, like in the days of Joshua. And the only reason it wasn't is because the hate built up. Now let's talk for just a second about the concept of hate. In many ways, this is the moon's challenge. Hate also means like an arrow. It doesn't mean something you did wrong on purpose, that you're trying to do wrong. It means the things you couldn't help but do wrong, like a missed mark. וזהו יש לפרש כי חטא יושלם לכן נדע איתה לכאורה קשה, הלא קשה פרשונו שוגה וקשה מכל מי, כי מי ששוגה כן תהיה מרקחת כנדע. And there's something to understand here. Because תיני תצא שבו עזרא לירושלים בחודש החמישי שהשליטה חטא. So the thing is, the Bible actually describes Ezra coming to Jerusalem on the 5th month, at the beginning of Tammuz, of Cancer, and this was the beginning of the rulership of the Chet over us. And again, I dare suggest it's bound up to the combination of heat and need. Notice that lunar deities are justice deities. Justice is one of her names. So the thing about sin is that it's not your fault, just like your period. This is the most fundamental lunar thing, right? חטא פירשנו שוגג וקשה, וכי מי מפני שגגל כן תהיה מרככת כנדע. It's part of the mystery in Lamentations. A sin, like a chet, is something by definition it's not your fault. So why is it such a problem? But it really is just like a time. Just the time of chet and tet, the deep summer, are just a little sensitive. V'yana yesh lefaresh chet chatay Yerushalayim b'zman garav b'zman shlitat chet tet al ken lenida ita al ken ita ra kenida v'lo kamo sharayot shasurin v'rokakin le'olam רק כמו נדע שמותרת לך, מותרת לאחר זמן. It's not like the kind of gross we become when we do something awful. No. It's the kind of gross that just happens. Which means it's okay after a while. That's the metaphor. The summertime, Tammuz and Av, right? Just a hot, rough time, and we are bleeding. Collectively, globally, it's just a little intense. But it's not like chas v'shalom when somebody does something wrong. No, it's just something we go through and have to deal with and notice and manage around. And that's what it's like. Chet Chatay Yerushalayim. That is what is the distance and exile in the book of Lamentations. Don't worry. It's just a time. I saw a terrible misogynistic joke from one of the sort of right memes. It said why, and it frames it like deeply wrongly. Why does Women on the Wall do their trouble on Rosh Chodesh? Why is Rosh Chodesh so important? It's just their time of month. I'm so sorry that you had to hear that joke from me. Oh, רק מולידה שמותרת לאחר זמן. No, don't worry. After a while, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. What a strange thing to associate with the fourth, but this is the negation of the negation. This is the general floating heat lamp criticism. More than a certain amount, right? Is more than I think adaptation necessarily has had to deal with. But on the other hand, every year is hotter, and every year we are different, and hopefully more capable. הנה התבונן על פי ספר צירה נע, חוש הראייה בנפש הוא נגד חודש תמוז בשנה, וחוש שמיעה בנפש נגד חודש אב בשנה. So, look at that thing we talked about before. Seeing parallels Tammuz, and hearing parallels Av. הנה תמצא בסידור שבטים ודגליהם, יהודי יששכר זבולון נגד ניסן אייר, סיוון דגל ההר. So look and see, the order of the tribes to their flags, one in Leviticus. It's Judah, Yisachar, and Zebulun paralleling Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. That's one flag, the first flag. The second flag, Degel Bet, Reuven, Shimon, Gad. The second flag is Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. Hine Reuven neged Tammuz. Traditionally, Reuven, Jacob's oldest son, and really most sort of embarrassingly incapable, but well-intentioned. Reuven is for Tammuz, is for Cancer, and Shimon is for Leo. Reuven, she saw a son, sees, and Shimon, God heard, hearing. נגד חודש אב ונגד חודש שמיעה, כן אמרה עליה בלעדתו לשון שמיעה, כי שמע אדוני, הנה תמצא אותו ראשון בשם, Reish, like Rishon, so Re'iyah, like in Re'iyah, and Reuven. And Shin, just the next letter down, he's reminding us of an inversion. The spies went out to see the problem. And Reuven, part of the disaster is how much he tries to address these problems that he sees. Traditionally in the Bible, feel free to look at the book of Genesis, Reuven keeps trying to solve problems and just, no one really respects it. He basically, loses the birthright almost backhandedly, like a clown. And his criticism and his concern is so much the building blocks of so much, including the spy cycle themselves and the beginning of the avatar of Leah. I don't know if we talk enough about the difference between Rachel and Leah. I've wondered about it so much, but let's say on one foot, it's about the difference between the expressed and expressible and attempt at control through an implicit presumption of functional within, which is Rachel and Ephraim and so on. הנה תמצא כי אנשים של אלו בית השבטים שהם נגד בית חדשים, בעוד שישראל משבצבר יראה במה שיראה, הנה הם רק למלכו בתורת הארץ בכ"ט סיוון, ממילא הלכו בתמוז חודש ראייה. ראו את הארץ והנה נרד לבני ישראל וגם חוש הראייה. Part of the traditional Tammuz narrative is that she sees him on the throne, doing okay, like she didn't matter. And part of the traditional desert narrative is that once they saw and judged and resented and just, lost interest in, seeing itself, all seeing, was a little damaged. Just capacity for anyone to see, which depends on so much real curiosity, right? We can't really see unless we're really okay with what's there. And it's very hard to be okay with what's there when it feels like a problem, and it looks like a problem, when it looks like it's going to be a whole thing, you know? And see, after 40 days, they got back from it. In the month of Leo, in the month of hearing, you know, and that's when they gave their testimony and just spread, just like snap, Deepa, curse on the land. And they gave their, testimony and just got everyone on board. And then speech and then hearing itself, more the hearing part. Let's say as much as Aries is associated with speech, Leo's associated with hearing. Just as much. אז את תמצא לנשיאים של שבטים ראובן ושמעון קיבלו פגם תכף בהיותם מדבר. So in the story, there's two particular, the 12 spies were the princes of each tribe. And the ones for Reuven and Shimon were the strongest. And in some ways the first, because they were in front. Now the one for Shimon is very famous, because they get in trouble for a whole other thing afterwards. The one for Reuven just has one of the best names, and he got in trouble the other way, with Korach, with the rebellion of Korach. Which in the Quran happens while they're still in Egypt, but in the Bible, it happens right at a seminal moment after the spies, after the rules. It starts to feel more and more like a problem. Levi Yitzhak Berdichev describes, says in the name of the Ramban, that after the whole thing with the spies, just like, people didn't really feel so good about the future anymore. They'd heard that it meant they weren't going to go to the place they were trying to go. And they lost a lot of faith and a lot of goodwill to Moses particularly. How, can't really blame anybody. But it's the word and hearing it that broke what it was to hear things for a little while, right? Let's say someone says something and you take it on a little much. Maybe it's a little much, It's hard to hear things in a way that filters the poison in them when they're themselves rough things. And I know that it's important to just breathe into and accept and just hear. And that's really probably the best thing we can do with most of the things we hear that hurt, is just hear them, hear into them, hear through them, hear past them, notice. But also, it's hard to control the impact of language. It hurts us when it hurts us, and that's hard to get past. Dear teacher friend, Josh Laufer, guy who composed that, sings in a Purim Megillat Esther context. The family. Pointed out one time how much the thing that we hear and the thing that we see, it won't hurt us if we're able to roll with it. Like, let's say someone punches me in the chest. Does it have to hurt me? If I roll with them, it doesn't have to hurt me. I can just make it there. But let's say I resist it in a way that turns it into a real impactful thing, then it's ow, and it's my resistance, not to blame the victim here, poor innocent victim, but if I am able to roll with the impact of something that hurts, then the other person is not hurting me. I'm engaging them, defanging to whatever degree, receiving the thing they're trying to share, which maybe is not just violence, and is not necessarily just hostility, just judgment, just heaviness and judgment. It's so important to hear it, more than it is to run from it a lot of the time, but it's important to run from it now and then. And don't worry, you'll know. If it's too much, it's too much. And you're always allowed to determine when it's too much. If you can. And if you can't, then you really might as well just roll with it. Hearing it, breathing into hearing, through it, past it, around it, hearing the projection in it, but also not letting the narrative of projection keep me from hearing something that could be true about me. Which famously Moses does in relationship to his criticism of his cousin Korach. Just starts crying, just weeps, and says, okay, is there a way we can find out? Is there a way we can test to see how right you are? Elitzur ben Shadayor Me'adat Korach. So he was the prince, he was the head of the 10 tribes that spoke, and came back and said, I don't think this Palestinian colonization project is worthwhile. This whole colonial thing, it's just not that we have moral qualms. We just don't think it'll be easy. Not that we're against, wiping out or just threatening out the people there. They're terrible people. They wiped out people before them. They wiped out people who wiped out the people who wiped out the people before them. But it looks like it'll be hard. The Zimri ben Salu. Now this is a deeply different priority. And this is one of his arguments for the difference between, Reuven and Shimon. But also Cancer and Leo. Let's just hear him out for a second. Zimri ben Salu, hu shalumiel kamo she'amru. Zimri, who is martyred for love, let's be honest, and reincarnates with his beloved, that's how serious they are, as an avatar of Shimon, of whatever it is that Leo is and that Shimon is. Al ken anu mipalim ched Elokei aznecha v'shama pekach einecho re'eh. Which is why there's a prayer that we pray. Bend your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes and see. That's from Daniel. Daniel chapter 9, number 18. Kedei she'etukan re'iyah u'shmiyah. Please come down, Lord. Please come down and get it that we can handle hearing and seeing the things. Please heal in us how we hear and how we're able to hear. How much we don't have to identify and how much we don't have to avoid being implicated, and noticing our participation, hear and see beyond our sense that we've need of what we need things to be. Chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom. This is not a thing people really have control over. It's something God just gives us, So feel free to be relieved if it feels like you can hear anything without getting mad. Or if you get mad without taking your anger too literally, you're really lucky if you don't take your anger literally. To heal, seeing and hearing. Al ken b'tu b'av shekvar kaima sihara b'shlomuta. Dear friend of mine's wife, who was also a dear friend of ours, passed away. And it was so hard to say anything on the grave. because the feelings are so much more than want to be said. And there was so much just to hear in the real and in the present that it didn't seem clear how much it even sounds. And more than that, so much of the story that came through of the greatness of her sounds like it had to do with being able to see, being able to hear. And the dynamic between them, the thing I really learned as a kid from the dynamic between them, Audrey and Steve, is being willing to see and hear, just like past all the assumptions, past all the expectations, if they're demands, and just see and hear. And so on the 15th of Av, of Leo, after the trouble is past, and darkness is past, and the mercies are awakened, into the fulfillment of the will, the underlying core priority. בנו ישראל יצוד וחולות בקמים ואומרות בחורסנה עיניך וראה. The custom for the full moon of Av, Tu B'Av, is the girls would go out and just dance in the vineyards. And say, hey young unmarried fella, bring your eyes and look and see me, the healing of seeing, but heard as a song at the beginning of hearing. Sana עיניך וראה, הנה בחורים רואים ושומעים, מה הן אומרות הכל תיקון עליון לכנסת ישראל, ביני פני מנרש וקבל שכר. That is to say, the young men are invited to look and hear the invitation, hear the concern, hear the hope. And what they're saying is all for the great fixing of the whole thing, of the whole community, of the whole structure, of the whole dynamic. Understand and contemplate and draw conclusions and earn credits, you guys. Oh.